Hello, Bethany education majors. Question of the day: what is the SIOP model? SIOP stands for Sheltered Instruction Observation Protocol. This is a research based instructional model that we will use for our lesson plans, and it is especially effective in addressing the academic needs of English learners or ELLs. The SIOP framework was originally designed as an observation tool for teachers to find out what were the best ways that ELLs learned. The idea of sheltered instruction is a key term because it focuses on the academic content blended with language development. And this framework is not only effective for ELLs, but it is an effective lesson plan and guide for all learners. Bethany College adopted this SIOP plan and revised the format a bit through the years. We have an interactive form. It was first adopted in 2018. So let's walk through the steps of filling out a SIOP plan, starting at the top. Once you have identified your subject and grade level the lesson will be for, the unit, the topic, and the title, you will be going to the KSDE Content Standards, www.ksde.org, or Kansas State Department of Education, and you will utilize this site probably in methods courses during student teaching as you become familiar with content standards and curriculum relevant to the grade level. Teaching and learning would be the first tab to find your content area. So here's an example of an 8th grade math lesson, geometry standards, and depending on your subject, your content area, your grade level, you may find the formats very different on the KSDE site. You might see broad standards in terms of topics or titles. They might be called benchmarks, and you might be some that are called objectives. So these terms kind of overlap with each other. What you should probably aim for is 1 or 2 objectives or standards from the KSDE website, and write them out completely as you find them on the site, including if there's any numbers or codes that go with them. You want to examine each of the standards or objectives to see how challenging they are, developmentally appropriate for your learners. And first, you want to identify the verbs. We're going to look for the verbs and then match them to Bloom's taxonomy. If you're not familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, Bloom's levels of thinking, or you just need a refresher, this is a very good website and resource. Also, we have used this chart on Bloom's taxonomy in class. You have your 6 levels, the 2 lower levels, knowledge, comprehension, and then gradually increasing application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation is the highest level of thinking. Notice the types of questions that usually generate factual answers, 1 or 2 word responses. When we go up to how and why, when we're asking questions, we are challenging students to think deeper. So from knowledge to evaluation. If you visit this site, you can also see the affective taxonomy or classification system for like social emotional learning, and psychomotor for performance majors such as PE or music and maybe even art. Also, some of you are using a revised version of Bloom's. It starts out remember, and create, I believe, is the highest one. So we're using the older version of Bloom's, and the verbs have been identified. The next thing is to match it to Bloom's levels. So if you look for some of these verbs, explain, apply, determine, we know apply is application. Explain is comprehension. Find would be under knowledge. Determine could be either and a synonym for identify or differentiate, so between knowledge and comprehension. So now we have identified, we can match the levels. Write this in your plan. Knowledge, comprehension, they're lower. And then we've hit application, which is higher. And the key is to find a balance of both lower level and higher levels of thinking to show evidence that they are appropriate, relevant, challenging, or rigorous. All right, so we have our big umbrella, the broad objectives, the standards that are going to drive the lesson. This is important. This gives you a roadmap to where you are going. The SIOP provides access to various content materials and integrates language development. This is the core, the heart of the SIOP framework. So very carefully and thoughtfully, you need to pick reading text, reading material. It might be something that already comes with the curriculum. And then in this box, write the name of the article, perhaps the pages you're using. If you're using a website, you can put in that address, any other resources that goes with the objective. So your selection of reading material should closely relate to the broader objective, and it's going to be more specific to the lesson. The next box would be picking the vocabulary. This is really important. Sometimes this is a good starting point, is to list all the key vocabulary that will go with the lesson. And then think about how the content vocabulary is going to be integrated within that lesson. So going back to my math sample lesson, let's pretend these words were the vocabulary I would focus on in just that lesson. Sometimes people put too many vocabulary in one lesson plan and they're never going to hit them. They might blend over into the next day's lesson or the next day's. So if you feel like you want to list them all for the unit, fine, but maybe highlight or star the ones that will be just for this specific lesson. The next important thing we will do is to find develop the content objective. And if you remember, the content objective is what the students will learn. You will get an idea of what the content objective is by looking at the overall umbrella term, and then the little umbrella is even more specific. It has to relate to your reading material too. Again, if we look at this simple content objective, we can apply it to Bloom's levels. Applying and interpreting would be application and analysis. So it is using higher level thinking. Okay, we're going to come back to the language objective and the assessment description section. And let's move ahead now to the opening of the lesson. So these two boxes kind of go together. They may overlap with each other. They are also at the heart and the core of the SIOP lesson model. Take time for students to reflect on and share what they know. Really take time to connect with them, with their experiences, and you will do this by developing some thoughtfully framed essential questions. You will want to see what's in their brain, see what they know. Let them think, process, connect to their experiences. How do you do this? Well, you could do it orally as a group or class. We really want to encourage dialogue. Have students talk to each other as a class, a group, or maybe even pair share. The key to the types of questions you ask in the essential questions section they are both content focused and open-ended. And some questions are better than others. Some encourage really short answers. You want to avoid those. If you do ask a yes or no question, then follow it up with, can you give an example, or can you explain more? The better open-ended ones, you will see them progressing into how and why, which involves more thought and deeper thinking and more deeper responses. I would encourage you to have 4 to 5 essential questions in your plan. So here are some essential questions for this example lesson plan. Note which questions pertain more to content and which ones are challenging students to think on their own, come up with their own ideas, and maybe connect to their experiences. I think the first one, what is the Pythagorean theorem, is content. Partially content. Now, real world, that'd be connecting to their experience and so forth. But you need a variety and you need both. You might also consider 1 or 2 main questions to write on your board. Here's an example of a teacher who put their content objective question, their essential question, math, on the board, and their language objective was also up there too. Notice that they're written in student-friendly terms instead of student will, it's how can I. That kind of gives you a guide as a teacher to keep you on track. All right, we have the essential questions. The next thing is to think about your hook. This is really, really important. Before learning about X, or your content, in this case the Pythagorean theorem, students are going to need to know, review, or understand some other things, possibly vocabulary, other concepts. Consider these prerequisites to the skill that they're about to learn. How are you going to bridge that gap in an engaging way? So I have identified what the prerequisite is, and I'm thinking about using a literacy strategy or a dialogic tool. Dialogic coming from dialogue. How can I get students to talk, to listen, to write, to read? So we have graphic organizers. These are great research-based tools. Reading strategies, KWL, talking concept maps, the T-chart, and the labels can be changed to cause effect, or objects I see in the picture and how they make me feel. So you can adjust those to your needs. Any of these graphic organizers can be used for the literacy strategies of reading, writing, speaking, and listening. We hope you use creativity in planning how you hook your learners. Many times it's helpful to use objects that they have in their daily life experiences. Helps them make connections to the new concepts, especially for English language learners. And when you use real objects, this is called realia. Another thing you could consider for your hook is to use visuals or photos or drawings or paintings. Paintings and illustrations and things that have symbolic representations are really interesting conversation starters. They're very easy to weave in your essential questions, and they're very thought-provoking. So back to my math lesson, I'm doing a simple drawing on the board and having the students do the drawing. For the speaking and listening engagement, maybe a review Kahoot, which is actually an informal assessment. Once you have come up with your idea about your hook, you can start forming your language or literacy objective. Where your content objective was what they learned, the language objective is how they're going to learn it. And you're going to do this by integrating in reading, writing, speaking, or listening. And you're going to try to do this in a very interesting way. Notice the language objective verbs. Which ones are reading, writing, speaking, and listening? We have label, describe, collaborate, compare. Now, once you have your content objective, your language objective, you're starting to think about your activities and strategies you're going to use. These activities also are assessments. So you can use them, double them up. And right now, for the purpose of this overview, we're going to talk about informal, formal. Informal are just the non-graded observation things that you're seeing to see if they're checking for their understanding, how they're doing. Formal would be something they would turn in for points. So kind of keep those definitions in mind. And already in the opening, I've talked about labeling. That's going to be informal. I've talked about the Kahoot. I'm going to call that informal. So be sure you label informal or formal. Maybe later on in the lesson, I've planned a performance assessment where I'm going to watch them work and complete a task. So that's something that they are actually demonstrating the knowledge. Okay, we are moving along to procedures. This is where the interactive form is very helpful. You will need your form to be able to stretch for all of your many directions. Keep in mind your lesson procedures are so easy and clear to follow that anyone you would give the lesson plans to could pretty much carry that out. Bullets or numbered list of detailed steps are recommended over writing paragraphs. So just a simple list. Explain the directions to each activity, how many students are working on it, how you're going to divide them up, how materials are to be used, and any other things that goes along to making that easy to understand. And you could use the acronyms TW and SW in your directions. And one last tip, it might be helpful if you're considering a 50-minute period to put in time minutes, time frames approximate, so you could kind of plan where you are. And I'm kind of starting without repeating what was written in the opening and the hook, picking up right there. And we're using a KWL. Students are working independently, but they're working in groups. I am not doing all the teaching and talking. I am now, but not during this lesson. I'm trying to balance it out so there is just as much student-centered collaboration as there is teacher, lecture, teacher presentation, and vary it, and so on. Please note how much time you are devoting to the pre-teaching. The pre-teaching would be that middle part of your plan, the essential questions and the hook, and developing your objectives and thinking about your vocabulary and the piece of reading material you're using. All of those planning pieces are important. And then find that balance in teacher-led instruction and student-centered collaboration. You can stop the video and look at some of these other examples more closely. This student teacher didn't put the TW or SW, but her directions were very clear. The last part of the plan is the wrap-up, and this is where you will tell how are you going to close the lesson. Please save a few minutes at the end to review some concepts. You might even throw in an informal or formal assessment, such as an exit ticket, a quick reflection, or maybe they're going to complete the section on the graphic organizer you gave them. And if you do, be sure you add these to that assessment section. So I've been using a KWL. I'll have my students complete the L and the KWL. And it will be formal because I'm going to have them turn it in for a grade. Okay, this is a sign that I'm needing to stop. This last part of the reflection, when you are in student teaching and you're doing a teacher work sample, you will reflect on the lesson with these questions. You can't do that now unless you have taught the lesson to students. So if you can just do the first part of the wrap up, that will be good enough. All right, I think we're going to call it a day, a night, and thank you for watching this overview.